Hello, welcome to Becoming Catholic. My name is Nate, an ex-youth pastor from a Protestant church who was recently convinced and has experienced a conversion of the intellect and the heart of the Catholic Church. Um, Today's video is about my experience and my wife's experience for the first time at a traditional Latin Mass. So let's jump in. So if you watched the last two videos, you would know that last year for my birthday, my wife put together a little trip that was basically all about Catholicism and all about Catholic devotions. And she didn't tell me about it. She did it all on her own. It was such a blessing. The only thing I asked for on my birthday was that that Sunday that we attend two different Catholic churches. The first church was a Maronite church. It was St. Anne's Maronite Church in Watervliet, New York. The other church was St. Joseph's in Troy, New York. St. Joseph's is a Carmelite Latin church. So they celebrate the Carmelite Latin Mass. And that's what today's about. So first thing to note is that we had already attended the Maronite church. The Maronite liturgy was first, it was earlier, and then we attended the traditional Latin Mass. We had coffee in between and then kind of rushed our way over to St. Joseph's. When we got there, the first thing that you're struck by of this particular church is how absolutely beautiful it is inside. I mean, the architecture, the statues, everything about this place is beautiful. And we were familiar with this church before. We'd never attended Mass at this church before, but my wife and I, we were wedding videographers. My wife has a wedding video company, and we had shot a wedding at this church. And at the time, I was struck by how absolutely beautiful it was. And then I saw the sign, and it said they had a traditional Latin Mass, and I didn't know there were any Latin Masses in my area, or at least driving distance, reasonable driving distance from where I live. So we went to this place, beautiful inside. One of the coolest things about the inside of the church is the pulpit, or whatever you call it, where the priest gives the homily, is this big marble chalice with like sculpted images of saints all around it. And it's just so cool. I mean, it's just like, it's such a cool thing to see. Like, I know a lot of Protestants who are not interested in Catholicism, who for whatever reason are watching this video, um, might think of that as terrible, weird, a waste of money. Um, I just want to remind you that like our God is the most beautiful God, and everything we do and everything we participate in and everything we do in his honor should also be beautiful. It was so cool. I mean, like, I've never walked into a Protestant church. I've been into a lot of Protestant churches, high and low. I never walk in and go, wow, this is beautiful. At best, I walk in and go, huh, this is kind of cool. Kind of feels like my favorite coffee shop. Like, that's the best I've ever felt in a Protestant church. But it was just so incredibly gorgeous inside. Something else that's worth noting about this church, I don't know if this is true of all Latin churches or all Roman churches, but it's kind of dark. Like, I mean, you can see it's not like it's not like there's no lights, but I don't know if it's just because all the windows are stained glass windows, if it's because the lights have been dimmed, or if there are not as many light fixtures in the building. I don't know what it is, but just like it feels darker in there. Um, and I would imagine that's not by accident, because it kind of creates this atmosphere of being solemn, being quiet. You kind of feel like your whole tone is toned down, and you're meant to like stop, be still, be quiet, be contemplative as you pray. And I know that a lot of people who go to the Latin Mass for the first time, I feel like a lot of Catholics who go to Latin Mass, I could be mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of them don't participate other than like standing, kneeling, sitting, doing the genuflections. Um, but a lot of times you just like see people praying a rosary during the Latin Mass, and it's kind of just like the priest is up there uh representing Christ crucified, and then everyone else is just kind of prayerfully in spirit participating, but really just praying their own devotional prayers. I know that's not the case for everybody, but that is the case for some, it seems. But that's not what we did. We picked up one of the little missals that has the Latin on one side and the English on the other, and we did our best to follow along in English, and tried to pray everything that came. We tried to pray in every place where we could, every place we could participate. I even did my best to follow along during the prayers where the priest had to do something quietly, and you're like, you can't really hear him. You're kind of like, you got your ear up. Um, so what we really liked about this, because if you watched the Maronite video, which info card right there, if you want to watch that video, what we liked about the Maronite church was that the language the consecration is done in is in Aramaic, but the rest of the service is in English. Um, Part of me was disappointed because you kind of have it in your head when you listen to enough rad trads on the internet that like the best thing to do is to go to a church where they don't speak any English, but really they're just talking about one specific mass, which is the one we attended, the traditional Latin mass. This mass, obviously, if you don't know, no English at all at any point except for the readings of the scripture and the homily. Homily has to be given in the language of the people, so otherwise it'd be useless. So they do the gospel reading and the New Testament reading and the Old Testament reading, and Father comes up into his cool big marble chalice and he gives his homily. And I don't remember what the homily was about, unlike the Maronite church, which like it really stood out to me. This one, I'm sure I liked it at the time, but I don't remember what it was about, which is a shame. But what I really like is Father Joseph is his name. He has an accent, and his accent, you could just like, I don't know if it's his accent or if it's just truly his heart, but again, so loving. I think that something I was really surprised by is a lot of the churches I have visited and a lot of the priests I've come into contact with over the last year or two has been that every priest really seems to love the Lord and really seems to love their people, which feels like a stark contrast to one, the presentation or the representation of priests that you get in television and from Protestants, and two, the priests that I have met in the past, because I have met a lot of priests in the past, and while they seem like fine fellows, they are not particularly like, you're not overwhelmed with the love of God when you meet them. And maybe that's me being critical and judgmental, but I feel like I've met a lot of priests where I just felt like you don't seem to actually like really care that much. Or if you do, you're intentionally not sharing it with me because you're afraid I won't like it. And I just don't like that about a priest, but not the case for Father Joseph at St. Joseph's in Troy, New York. Um, he just seems like a loving guy. I will say at the wedding ceremony that we shot video at, during his homily, it was so cool. Because the couple was not married at the time, obviously. Duh. Why did I say that? But they had kids, like, and not like babies either, like an 8-year-old. You know what I mean? Like they had like children, and I think they might have had two. So that not a great start. And Father Joseph gets up there with just like the most loving smile. He just makes this joke about how they did it backwards. They had kids, then got married. You did it backwards. And I don't know if it felt less intense because of the accent or if it felt less intense because he was just really good at being gracious and kind and gentle in his presentation. But everyone laughed. It was just like a funny joke. But you could really sense the like, I think you should be ashamed of yourself for having sinned against God in this way. And but also I love you and I'm glad you're getting married now. And it was just like really cool. He just seems like a really sweet dude. So loved him, loved his homily, just cool, a cool place. What we really liked, what was cool actually was what my wife really liked. I say I really liked it too, but this really stood out to my wife was the head coverings. Um, I think she did bring a head covering. She had bought a head covering for Latin mass, and if it wasn't for that time, we had attended another weekday mass, and she wore a head covering at that point. But she loved the women wearing head coverings. I think if I remember correctly, she wasn't wearing a head covering for this service, and she was one of two women that weren't wearing head coverings, and every other woman had something over their head, and she thought that was so neat. So that was kind of cool. I think she just liked the idea of like I think she liked about it what most people like about it. Honey, if you're watching, correct me and I'll correct myself in the next video. But I think what really spoke to her, I have to imagine, is something that speaks to everyone who's interested in Catholicism, but just maybe not about this particular thing. And that's the physicality or the material world that's involved in the Catholic faith. Like for people who pray the rosary or pray the Jesus prayer on the Chotki, there's something about having your hand on a thing and running the beads or running the knots through your fingers as you pray, and your prayer feels physical. Kneeling as you pray makes your prayer physical. So something about involving the material world and involving your body in your prayer, it goes beyond just what's in my head and what's in my heart. There's a sort of physical presentation of how I feel and what I'm doing. I think it really speaks to a lot of people. And so my wife really liked the head coverings. And after I think it was after that service, she had like gone on Amazon or Etsy or something and ordered a head covering, a black head covering that had like an image of Mary stitched into it. It wound up actually being kind of cheaply made, so we returned it and we're gonna get her a new one. But yeah, it was cool to like see her appreciate that. And something else to note is how beautiful the music was. So I mentioned this in the Maronite video that we did not like the music at the Maronite liturgy, and that is in part just because it was very Middle Eastern. And again, not a problem. Do not have a problem with the Middle East. Do not have a problem with people who are Middle Eastern, and I do not have a problem with their music. But as a Western person, as someone who's from America, that style of music just really doesn't like speak to us. And there was just something so somber and big. It, kind of feels like I mean, I've never been to the Grand Canyon. My wife has, so based on what she said, but like people talk about the Grand Canyon or they talk about the sky, the night sky when you can see the stars and just how big it feels, and it makes everything about the world feel bigger than you. And that's how the sound was. That's how the choir in this Latin mass was. It was awesome. I didn't know what they were singing, but it just felt beautiful, and it was kind of nice to not know what they were singing because there was a sense of something greater than me is taking place here. Something bigger than me, bigger than my comprehension is happening now. And that's what I really like about it. And I think that's what a lot of people really like about the Latin Mass is that it feels bigger than you and beyond you. It takes you out from being the center of your relationship with Jesus. Because as a Protestant, that's something I really used to struggle with. And I think it's something most Protestants struggle with is the self-centrality of my faith, right? My faith is about my relationship with Jesus, with my Jesus. And it's not that it's untrue, but there's that statement like, if you were the only person in the world, Jesus still would have died on the cross for you. And maybe that's true, but it's not helpful. Like, it might be helpful if you struggle with loving yourself, but it's not helpful in general. It's not something that everyone needs to hear. What everyone needs to hear is that you are a speck of dust. You're so small and worthless. And yet, God loved you so much and every other speck of dust so much that he was willing to die on the cross. And a perfect representation of this, and I'm sure I've talked about this in the past, and if I haven't, I will talk about it again in the future, is as a Protestant, I used to pray the Lord's Prayer, but I would say, my Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give me this day my daily bread. Because I thought it was weird to pray our and us and we when I was alone. And then I realized the part of what makes that prayer so powerful is the fact that I am not saying I, me, myself. I'm saying us, our, we, because The faith is about the group, right? God did not come to save a single Jew. He came to save the nation of Israel, right? God did not set Moses free. He set Israel free. And when Jesus died on the cross, he didn't set me free from my sin. He set the church free from her sin. The whole group of people who were destined to be that group of people is who he was sacrificed for. So being in a liturgy where the mass is the sacrifice of the mass is being offered, Christ crucified is being represented to God on my behalf and for our prayer requests. When that's happening and it's in a language that is ancient and a language that I don't understand, it makes it feel so much bigger than me. It makes it feel like what it is. There's that symbolism, right? Because it feels that way, it makes me think it's that way, which is helpful in catechizing someone because it is truly that way, right? The mass is truly bigger than myself. It's going to happen whether I'm there or not. The grace of God is taking place with or without me. Christ is being, or the host rather, is being transformed into Christ's body and blood, irregardless of my interaction with it and my presence at the mass. So it's really cool. The traditional Latin mass is really cool. And I've been to quite a few Catholic churches at this point in time, and I can honestly say there is nothing like the Latin mass in that regard. There's only one other thing I want to point out about the Latin mass, and it is my favorite part of the Latin mass. It is, I do not go currently to a traditional Latin mass, and you'll learn about that later. But the thing that I miss, if I could adopt one thing from the Latin mass and just put it in every liturgy, personally, that's just what speaks to me, is the prayer that the laity make before receiving the Eucharist. And I'm going to botch it because I can't remember the words exactly off the top of my head. But it's a reference to the Roman centurion who says, "I am not worthy for you to come into my house. Just say the word and I will be healed." But we say this about our bodies. "Oh, Lord, I'm not worthy for you to come into my body." And you beat your chest. You say it 3 times and you beat your chest. And there's something so incredibly humbling and beautiful and Holy Spirit filled about confessing, "I am not worthy for you, my Lord, to enter my body, for you to come under my roof. Only say the word and I'll be healed." And then to say that and go receive communion. What's so beautiful about that is in the gospel story, Jesus doesn't go into his house. He just says the word as the centurion asks. But when you go to mass and you receive the Eucharist, the Lord still goes into the house. You admit humbly, "I am not worthy. I'm not worthy, Lord." And he still comes in. That's the grace of God. It's so powerful. And I love the church that I go to. I absolutely love the liturgy that I participate in every Sunday. But the prayer that we say before receiving the Eucharist is not like that particular prayer. This particular prayer is so beautiful and so moving, and it's so rich spiritually. And yeah, so that is my take on the traditional Latin Mass. I took my wife to the church I've been going to recently. It's a different liturgy than the traditional Latin Mass, and she actually didn't like the one that I've been going to and said that she'd preferred the Latin Mass. So that was really cool. It's just kind of cool to hear her experience in her heart and just say, like, this, I actually think this speaks to me more. And I love that. It's just such a cool liturgy. So that's it. That's all I have for you today. That's my experience, my first experience at the traditional Latin Mass. Thank you very much for your prayers. Thank you for praying for me and my family. Please continue to pray for us. As I've said in the last couple of videos, we need it. We're going through a lot. I'm excited to be done with what we're going through, and I'm excited to tell you about all we've gone through and all that Christ has done in my heart over the last 2 years. So God bless you. See you in the next video. Peace.